Welcome, everybody. This is the fourth video of my experience with continuous glucose monitoring with NutriSense. So I am putting together a series of videos as I go through this experience, and also as owner of Way Less MD and Wellness. We are all about digging into foundational health and really digging into the foundation so that weight loss can be long-term. And blood sugar management is so crucial in so many ways, and it's so beyond just people with diabetes or pre-diabetes managing their blood sugars. So really that's why I wanted to put this together, because there's such an opportunity to really dig deeper into your health by literally honing in and focusing on what your blood sugars are doing. So I like to set these videos up with just really kind of highlighting what I talked about in the last one, and then bringing something new that either I learned or I got a question about. So just kind of going back to the highlights of the last video, I talked about the difference between continuous glucose monitoring and the traditional glucometers that you're doing finger prick and getting your blood sugar levels at various times throughout the day. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to the last video or video 3. And I also talked about artificial sweeteners, and I really do want to expand on that in this one and really help people understand what happens in our body when we eat like artificial sugar versus real sugar. And before I kind of get into that and helping you understand like why we care about all this and why it's bad that blood sugars are elevated and what that means to our health, but it's also important to understand our macronutrients. So the food that we're eating, what causes blood sugar spikes. And so macronutrients, we have our protein, we have our carbs, and our fats. Carbohydrates obviously cause blood sugar spikes. They break down into sugars. And depending on the different food that you're having, you're definitely going to get a response. And then you have your protein, and protein is really not stored in the body. But it can cause blood sugar spikes if eaten in excess, because the body will actually convert it to glucose, and it's a term called gluconeogenesis. And so the body is able to convert protein to glucose when needed. So fat is the last macronutrient, and fat has zero effect on blood sugars. So that's why you hear people that are doing fasting, they're able to do like MCT oil or coconut oil or something like that, because fats do not have any effect on blood sugar. And so that's really important when you're thinking about putting meals together, because actually by combining certain things, you can kind of stunt that spike, and that's ultimately what you want to do. You want to keep your levels kind of stable. I mean, of course, you're going to get spikes when you eat and such, but you want to limit those, the frequency of those spikes and the significance of the spikes. So hopefully that makes sense. So the first thing, kind of going into the artificial sweeteners, what I wanted to kind of touch on is the difference between, again, artificial sweeteners versus regular sugar. So if you're just doing like regular sugar or carbohydrates and such, but artificial sweeteners, if you're just eating or drinking something that's artificially sweetened and doesn't have any calories, it's really important to understand what's going on there. So when you consume, say when you chew gum, like what I saw in my report, when I chewed gum, I mean, gum has less than 5 calories, very minimal. It did have like less than a gram of sugar. And so when you consume that artificial sugar without calories, the body still responds to it as if it's food. And so when I'm going to go through kind of what happens when you consume food and why it's such a problem, and then I'm going to tie it back to the artificial sweeteners and why I'm hoping to make a case for all the people that are like chronic, Diet Coke drinkers or chronic gum chewers, because you're doing just as much harm. Well, maybe not quite as much as like sugar, but you are definitely wearing out your pancreas and insulin and such. So when you eat food, typically there's carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are in everything with the exception of fat, and protein actually has 0 carbohydrates. So remember what I said, though, if in excess, it can be converted and actually have an impact on your blood sugar. So when you eat, your blood sugars immediately rise. The blood sugars start the whole signaling process of within your body of what the body should do. So first thing that happens, well, maybe it's not the first, maybe, enzymes are being secreted because your body's getting ready to break down some foods, but your pancreas alerts insulin. There's cells in the pancreas called beta cells that alert to insulin and say, listen, go get the sugar and get it out of the bloodstream and bring it into the cells. So that is what insulin does. It literally goes into circulation because blood or sugar is not supposed to be in the blood. It can only be there for a very short period of time, then it has to be pulled out and transported into the cells to be used. So it either goes to muscle cells, the liver, or fat. And unfortunately, in this day and age, it's typically going to the fat because the muscle and the liver can only store so much. So typically for most people, every time insulin spikes, goes to get the sugar, it's going right to their fat stores. That's why we call insulin the fat storing hormone. So with that being said, what happens is when you are constantly eating carbohydrates and you're constantly getting these spikes, you're constantly getting insulin's being asked to do its work all the time. So over time, insulin gets tired. It's very, very tired, and it's so overworked that then the cells that are accepting the sugars, they become resistant to insulin. So the body is no longer responding to what is supposed to happen because it is overworked. And so that's when prediabetes starts, and then ultimately diabetes sets in because the body no longer acknowledges what insulin is trying to do. So you're insulin resistant. And so, when you have sugar sitting in your bloodstream, that is when the damage begins. Because sugar, if you think of like water and syrup, your bloodstream becomes syrupy. And that syrup starts to break down your cellular wall, your arterial wall. And that starts this cascade of inflammation in the body. And every disease starts with an inflammatory process. So whatever you're vulnerable for, whatever your genetics are, as far as what you're prone to get, that process starts. And the inflammatory continues, and the disease progression continues. And it's all from the insulin spikes and too much sugar that is sitting in the bloodstream. So we can definitely take that a step further, but I wanted to try to keep these videos as short as possible. But just to touch on the artificial, so when you eat artificial sweetener and it doesn't have any calories, so you get the blood sugar spike, the blood sugar will, obviously trigger beta cells, insulin. Insulin goes to get sugar. There's no sugar there. So then the body will just normally metabolize the insulin, but every time you eat that artificial sweetener, so if you're eating it all day long, you're producing insulin and your body's like, what is going on? Like, I'm supposed to be taking up the sugars into the cells, but insulin is there. My body's not seeing the sugar. I don't know what to do with it. So then this is where metabolic dysfunction begins. So understanding this concept, and that's why I'm going to keep reiterating this stuff, is so crucial. And that's why at Weightless MD, we are all about the foundation, and all of our programs are intended to not only get people to lose weight, but to get them into a healthier metabolic state. So that's my video and teaching for today. So I will look forward to seeing you all there for the next one. Thank you so much.